I want to talk about your experience as owning a business as a woman, because I do feel that a lot of women, especially in India, when I've spoken to them, it's a little bit harder for them than it is for men. Did you have that experience?
So personally, because I've never really worked anywhere but in my own label and I've always been in a position of power, it hasn't actually been challenging for me. But I do know the girls who worked with me have found it challenging, because all the karigars that we have are 99.9% men. So the girls who would have to come in and like deal with them, they've found a lot of like, how can you be my manager and how can you,
Wow.
So that is like, even my shoe designer, my Tanu, she struggled a lot because she had to deal with the shoe industry, which was just only men, and she had to deal with vendors who were just extremely sensitive to taking directions from women.
Wow.
Yeah. So I've seen girls struggle. I haven't personally, maybe I haven't really thought about it as deeply as I should have, because I know that it is harder for women, and I don't think that is just to do with us being in India.
No, it's not.
It is hard, yes, in general. But personally, I cannot really narrate any experiences.
And how do you guide your team through that? So your shoe designer, you mentioned somebody else, when they're experiencing that.
Yeah, so I think there I could have been better, because at the beginning when they would come to me and I'd be like, men are going to be like this. You just really need to know how to get your work done. Don't fight back, but just like figure out a softer way to just get your work done, because you just have to get your work done, right? Like say this or say that or do this. Just like, don't be so aggressive, don't be so assertive, don't be da. But now I feel like that was such wrong advice, because they were 100% right in wanting to do it the way, because there's absolutely nothing wrong in them asking why my order is not on time, or when will I get it, or can you give me an update, and these men would get really upset by that, like, well, how can she ask me? They would message me, why is she, I don't want to talk to her, you talk to me directly, like, why is she going on asking me, and I was like, she's doing a job, but I should have kind of empowered her to say, fight back.
As women, I feel we're very much told not to be assertive.
Yeah.
And when we are assertive, when we are strong, when we are firm, people look at us as difficult.
100%.
I felt that my whole life.
100%.
And when I stand my ground on something, as much as I stand my ground, inside I feel guilty.
Yeah.
Because I think, what are they thinking of me?
I agree.
If my mum asks me for something and I say no, and I set a boundary, I still feel guilty.
Yeah.
Why is that?
It's just ingrained, right? Being a good girl is ingrained.
It is.
It is. And it's so hard to understand that there is just not a good girl and a bad girl. There is an in-between. And the in-between has never really been defined.
Yes.
By anyone, especially not in our role models, like our mums or anybody older than us, at least from that generation, because they just had it so much harder.
So much.
And because words and like these quotes and like all these things that we see on Instagram are okay, but the only way to actually learn this is by watching somebody. And I think the role models were missing, so we didn't know what an in-between girl looked like, and like, what is her adjective, like, how do you define her, and what does she look like, what does she say? And it was so scary to become that person who suddenly wouldn't have that identity, and like, who am I right now? It's so important for us to be able to identify at every point that, oh, I'm being like her, I'm being like this one, so I'm okay, I'm being like her, so I'm bad, I'm being like this or that. So it's the in-between that I think is our responsibility to now be able to define and be role models for the next generation. And I feel really fortunate. Somebody asked me on the panel the day before, what inspires you? And I said, my team inspires me. And the fact that I can actually work with so many girls and sit with them and tell them that you can ask for a raise without them getting emotional, without their voices like shaking, like, I don't know how much I
Yes.
They're so scared, and I can picture myself in their shoes. And the only thing that I tell them is that you have a right to ask, I have a right to say no. Both parties are equally empowered here. So don't be afraid, because like if you ask for something really crazy, I will be able to say, listen, I won't be able to do that, and vice versa. So there is a power imbalance in girls. They need to be built up. Like, we have to be built up. Now I'm 35 now in 2 days.
Wow, happy birthday.
So, and I think what happened to me when I turned 30 was this kind of a realization that, oh shit, you know, I don't know my identity in a very real sense of like, am I a good girl or am I a bad girl? Because there were certain decisions I was taking in my personal life that was just making me question that all the time. And this cannot be learned unless you are put in a position or a life situation or an experience where you're absolutely identityless, and the only person you can identify with is yourself, and then you're forced to look at like, who am I now? So I think that in your 20s, and that's most of the girls that I work with, luckily they haven't had life experiences that have put them in a position where they just only need to identify with themselves.
Wow.
They're still like, I'm his daughter, I'm her sister, I'm his girlfriend, I'm his wife. It's still all of that.
Wow.
And as long as we're doing that, we're actually fooling ourselves, because we're actually like losing so much time on just. And now when I look at myself, I'm nobody's anything.
Same.
So I have to really, really, really find who I am, and I think that's a journey that I'm on right now. I think that without the recognition that everything that I do is interconnected.
Yes.
I'm completely 100% interdependent, and there are people who are dependent on me and I'm dependent on them. That's not what I mean by when I say like I have to identify as me. I think that when I specify that, I mean the question of like, who am I? Right. When there is nobody else's voice speaking through me, or nobody else's ideas of what I need to say or be like in this situation guiding me. That kind of a vacuum that gets created when you eliminate all of that and all of what society or your family or everybody has kind of defined for you. And probably I've understood that as my definition through them. That's what I'm talking about. But I would not have been able to do Papa Don't Preach without every single person who's been a part of my journey since 2000 and probably, I don't know, 10 or before that, like when I was 19. People are so important.
Definitely.
You cannot do anything in a vacuum, in isolation. Never. I'm not a person who can even design sitting alone. I'm not a person who can like think of a caption sitting alone. I need people to like bounce off my ideas. I need them to say like really funny or ridiculous things and me saying, oh my god, that's shit. Like, I can do it better, you know. Even if it's for that, I do need people. You need people all the time. So
the interdependence is is really key, actually.
Yeah.
And I think back to that point of how I feel like because I've always been so independent, I found it really hard to be interdependent.
Right.
Because sometimes I thought that means being dependent.
Yeah.
And so sometimes when I feel like I am reliant on somebody, I feel like, oh my God, this is like such an attack to me. Because I think like, oh my God, are they going to think I'm dependent on them? Because I'm not. I'm not dependent on them at all. But I've learned with time, especially in relationships, that you do need to be interdependent. I mean, I'm a solo person on my team, so I can't say that I work with anyone because I do this by myself. But I think when I do hopefully one day get a team and work with them, that interdependence is key. And I remember reading a book about it. Was say if there's a wall and you're standing and you're trying to look over the wall. Dependence would be like someone has to carry you to look over the wall, and interdependence would be like you lean on each other so you can both see.
Absolutely.
Right?
I think. But this is a team, right? The people you have on this couch with you is a team.
Yeah.
So you are working with people. You wouldn't have a podcast if you didn't have a team.
If I didn't have anyone to come on. That's so true.